Okay, I think we are going to get started. For those of you that have not been here in the morning, I'm Dan Donath. I'm one of the vice presidents in CRA's London office. I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Monti, the former Prime Minister of Italy and two-time European Commissioner for Competition and Internal Market. Professor Monti has also been the president and the rector of the Bocconi University and is currently the honorary president of the Institute for European Policymaking that Bocconi established as a tribute to him. The goal of this institute is to conduct and disseminate high-quality research on European policy issues, promote the rule of law, contribute to Europe's competitiveness, and foster policy debates. As part of these goals, Professor Monti has become again more active in competition policy debates, which is very exciting. As all of you know, this is something though that I found out about quite recently, so he cannot be with us in person today, but instead he will join us online. Given that, as Olivia mentioned today in the morning, Professor Monti has really laid down the founding bricks of the more economic approach in competition law, I think it's not an understatement to say that many of us are here today thanks to him, including this great conference. So it is more than fitting that Professor Monti will deliver a speech on the more economic approach to competition policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to have been invited today at this very important conference. And it's always a pleasure for me to be back within the evolving and ever-increasing competition family in Europe and worldwide. I'm particularly pleased that I am asked to say something about the introduction of the more economic approach in competition policy, which indeed I believe and hope that I fostered when I was competition commissioner. How did this come about? Well, first of all, there is a subjective element. I am an economist by background, and when I was appointed to the European Commission under the Santer Commission beginning in 1995, I have been put in charge of the internal market, financial services, taxation, and a few other things. Then, 5 years later, I was a member of the Prodi Commission, and at that point, I must say, much to my satisfaction, I was given the responsibility as competition commissioner, which was a good sequence to have because, as all of you know, the competition commissioner has a strength of his or her instruments of action that is considerably stronger, more effective, faster than the internal market commissioner. So it was good to have experienced for 5 years to enforce European law and foster European integration with the less powerful instrument, and then exercise with the more high profile, but above all, more effective, prompt, and almost instant power. By the way, one of the conclusions I drew from this comparative experience was that I then proposed that the enforcement powers in these two key aspects of European policies should become more aligned. That is, the enforcement powers in the internal market should be brought closer to those of the competition commissioner. As you know, the difference is that in internal market, if the commission sees an infringement, it has to follow a three-step, very lengthy procedure, which eventually will end up in the court. The court will take its time to judge, and then there will still be a period of obtaining the removal of that obstacle to the single market put in action by a member state. Whereas in the competition area, be it cartel, mergers, abuse of dominance or state aid, whatever the Commission decides goes immediately into effect. And then, of course, the parties that may include the member states can and often do go to the court to seek the change of the decision. But in the meantime, what the Commission has disposed stay there. And in a vast majority of cases, the court, not always, follows the Commission. So it's rather natural, because of my background and because of the previous experience at the internal market, that I would try to further improve the ability of DG Comp to use the instruments of economics in analysis, in arguing cases, etc., etc. Why in particular did I launch the enhanced or more economic approach to competition policy? And then shortly afterwards, in 2003, the new position of chief competition economist at DG Comp. Well, there was, of course, my own subjective and orientation as an economist, but there were, I believe, and I recall vividly, a number of broader policy considerations or considerations of context which led me, with my colleagues at DG Comp, to consider it extremely important at that particular moment to become stronger in economic analysis, and in particular to get a stronger basis there for the dialogue we were entertaining with our American colleagues at the Department of Justice and at the FTC. Yes, because following what my predecessor, Karel van Miert, had started doing with the two American colleagues of his time, Bob Pitosky, chairman of the FTC, and Joel Klein, assistant attorney general for antitrust, we had a very strong, loyal bilateral cooperation, which was essential also to give companies some confidence in the increasing uniformity of the way in which competition authorities across the Atlantic would deal with them. But when I came in, there was the George W. Bush administration. And as you will remember or will have read about it, that had a considerably less assertive, less aggressive attitude than the antitrust under the Clinton administration. In particular, if we take the Microsoft case, you will recall that in the US, the Justice Department had gone for a very bold action, ordering as a structural remedy the breakup of the company. That was not indeed followed by the court, and the settlement that the court imposed in 2001, which was, by the way, a few weeks after the tragedy of September 11, which means that it was probably felt as a higher political consideration that the American economy did not need at that time a rather considerable perturbation or shock like would have been the breakup of Microsoft. So we started to experience a divergence in the intensity of the antitrust and merger control attitude on both sides of the Atlantic. So I was extremely keen to continue the good cooperation, but I was not ready when the Bush administration people came in. I was not ready to trade a continuation of excellent bilateral cooperation with the demands from Washington that Brussels should become more lenient. So how could we keep our substantive differences and yet cooperate nicely and loyally? It was not an easy equation to pursue. And we thought that giving explicit recognition that the Americans were further ahead of us in the application of economic methods to antitrust cases, and that we wanted to move in that direction, indeed contributed to at least see us converging in terms of will and longer term perspective, which allowed us not to break up this climate of good cooperation in spite of some very remarkable divergences on specific cases. One of them was in merger control, when we prohibited the GE Honeywell acquisition, which had already been approved by the Justice Department in the US. And the other one was precisely on Microsoft, when our proposed settlement were more demanding than the ones introduced in the US. At any rate, the company did not fully agree on them, so that we took a negative decision, finding the abuse of dominance or monopolization, and a fine, which at that time seemed a huge fine, and in fact changed the business model of the company in some respects, something of which I believe in retrospect today Microsoft is pretty grateful. But it was therefore a matter of equilibrium on a razor edge to pursue our more activist agenda and yet give a perspective of good cooperation, in particular through the enhanced economic analysis. It was important, of course, to maintain a good cooperation also because we did have a very common agenda going well beyond the Atlantic, because we wanted the American colleagues and we, with other competition authorities certainly, including the European national competition authorities, we wanted to pursue a more global going together, which gave birth to the ICN, the International Competition Network, in 2001. So these are the background reasons for the introduction of a more economic approach. I should not shy another very, very important reason, which was a serial defeat by us and by me, because it was my time in office, even though one of the three merger cases that had been annulled by the Court of First Instance was prepared under my predecessor. At any rate, I took and take the responsibility for the decision, which was finally mine. And since the Court of First Session judged that we had had a rather poor economic analysis, that was another powerful factor to put more effort into that. I must recall, it's not one of my best memories, that after the third in a row defeat at the court, one of the most highly distinguished lawyers, still today highly distinguished, in the Financial Times, called for my resignation as competition commissioner, which I did not consider even for a minute, because I was convinced that crisis, and it was a major crisis for us, can and must be used to bring radical remedies and improvements in whatever situation one finds himself. And that, probably without that crisis, I would have found it more difficult to persuade some segments of DG competition, which were doing a first-class job recognized throughout the world, but sometimes with a degree of self-assurance which was not conducive to a super self-critical attitude. And we changed so many things in that, and one was a stronger economic analysis. I must say that it was mentioned before that I, at a point, became the Prime Minister of Italy. That was explicitly due to a crisis, because it was the time when the Italian state was running fast towards bankruptcy. We managed to avoid that, and certainly we introduced at that time, under the pressure of a terrifying spread between the Italian and other interest rates, some structural reforms, like in the area of pensions, that my successors have found it much more difficult to pursue later on without these conditions of stress. A word on well, I did mention the setting up of the Chief Competition Economist Office, and I must say that that was done also because I wanted to reinforce de facto the high degree of autonomy of which within the College of the Commissioners, the Competition Commissioner enjoys. And of course, I thought that if we had our own well-structured, although not so large, competition economics department, we would be better able to keep our autonomy of judgment, even though with total openness in discussion with the other components of the Commission. And as you will know, our first selection for Chief Competition Economist was Professor Lars Hendrik Röller. And here, maybe I can reveal for the first time after 20 years why I, in the end, came to his name as the first incumbent for that important office. By the way, Professor Röller, after holding for several years that office for the European Commission, moved back to Germany. He was and is a German. And as you might know, he was for a long period the economic advisor to Chancellor Merkel. So obviously the experience at the European Commission was considered rather well by her. We had a concours, we had a selection, we had several first-class candidates, including Hendrik. I must say that beyond the qualities that he, like others, had shown, there was, in my final consideration, there were a couple of additional, more political reasons. You will say, "Hi, this is a scandal. Political reasons in the selection of the chief competition economist. That cannot be." Of course, not political reasons like influences by member states or by politicians, that those were not there and of course would have been resisted. But because we needed, as the first incumbent of that office, someone who in our minds would be the most coherent with the policies that we wanted to introduce in EU competition policy. And why I thought it would have been particularly important to have a German with a long experience in the US and who had, unlike many other competition economists, done a lot of work also on state aid control and industrial policy. Well, the reasons are two. We were just about to conclude the negotiations on Regulation 1/2003, the modernization of antitrust, and although the Germans were always those preaching loudest in favor of subsidiarity, simplification, etc., they, in fact, were so close, I would say, intellectually, psychologically, and spiritually to their own law, competition law, particularly concerning the abuse of dominance, that was an obstacle in the final adoption of this important regulation, which in the end was adopted also with the support of Germany, particularly because I told the German economics minister of the day that I would have loved to approve such an important measure with the support of Germany, the mother of competition policy in Europe. But since unanimity was not required, at the next meeting of the Council, we would have concluded at any rate. So the day before the meeting of the Council, he said that upon further consideration, he too could agree. But that was probably something on which the appointment of Professor Röller helped. And the other reason, which is so visible today in retrospect, is that he was strong on state aid analysis. He was, unlike many in Germany at those times, and then again today, not very favorable to generous state aid. And on the other hand, he was not ideologically contrary to industrial policy. So I'm sure that if you had found yourselves to make the final decision on whom to appoint among two or three who had reached the final stage of the contest with an extremely high evaluation, you would also probably have given some consideration to these elements, from which I draw, if I can, I, who have been an economist by background and certainly not a politician by background, I would draw the conclusion here that it is very, very important for the competition commissioner to act strongly with economic and legal instruments, but to have some broader policy sense, if not political instinct, is also very, very crucial, because to push ahead the navigation of the competition ship, which is not seen as a friendly ship, but is rather seen sometimes as a powerful and annoying icebreaker by many in the business and government sectors, one has to have also some ability for navigation, like in many fields of life, if not all of them. Do I still have 4 or 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman? Do I still have 4 or 5 minutes?
Of course you do.
Thank you very much. I was going to interpret silence as consent. But now I feel more encouraged, although I promise I will not redouble the allotted extra time. No, I think that today, if I were there today, and of course I'm not aware of the details of all the details of the outstanding work that Margrethe Vestager has been doing in this term, but of course I am aware of the more and more heated, interesting fights within the Commission and within Europe on industrial policy, competition policy these days. I would say that today, what would be very, very needed, maybe it is there completely already, would be a very, very strong economic analysis of the implications of institutional setups. And this can guide one's consideration also in delicate gray zones at the borderline between industrial policy and competition policy. For example, only a few years ago, there was the landmark Alstom-Siemens case. I will not enter into the details of this case, which I do not know, but I've seen the criticisms to the decision of the European Commission in the name of the need to have European champions. I have nothing at all against European champions. I certainly prefer them to national champions. And I even would say that the European Commission should help the formation of European champions and has many instruments to do that, maybe also within the realm of competition policy. But please don't use merger control to do that. And here it's really an institutional reflex which is missing, certainly not in the Commission on that decision that it took, but in many observers. Imagine that on that case, in the face of the objective arguments that had led at a certain point, even I believe the CEO or some very high position of Siemens to say that indeed there were competition problems. But suppose that the European Commission interpreting a mandate to foster European champions had given its assent to that merger. Well, can such a merger, can a European champion be born with the ambition of operating only in Europe? Certainly not. It will be born and baptized and launched as a European champion aspiring to be a strong competitor throughout the world. But then a very simple institutional reflection is that it will then need the authorization by the merger control authorities in Washington, in Tokyo, in Beijing, and so on. Is it likely that, for example, the American antitrust authorities would defer to the superior political consideration that some flexibility should be applied to this case, evaluating the effects of the merger in the American market, because that is in deference to a European champion? Certainly not. And what would happen if the Washington authorities did not authorize such a young and kicking European champion? Well, it could not operate there. But then I think it would be very likely that to such a European champion, the same destiny would happen that happened to General Electric and Honeywell when we prohibited the merger in Europe. It had been authorized in Washington. It might have been authorized elsewhere in the world, but the two companies decided not to go ahead with the merger because the economics would not have been robust enough with the preclusion of the European market for their products, regional aircrafts and avionic equipments. So the worst thing to do would be to shoot a decision in honor to an aspiration of strength of Europe, only to see it become a flop because it would not apply elsewhere. And can I finally say that we now rightly discuss about the competition among continental blocs, the US, Europe, and China. And we know that we entered a phase where the role of public powers in guiding, in a sense, the economies and the big companies is much stronger than during the Reagan-Thatcher years. So we should expect that also in Europe, like certainly in China, like certainly in the US, look at IRA, the role of public powers should increase. But we have a binary possibility here. The percentage of decision-making by the public sphere in the case of the European Union should increase because of an enhanced role of public decision-making at the national level or at the community level? Well, I believe that from the point of view of competitiveness, which is always recognized to have its very first bedrock in an efficient single market, if we allow growing room to national decision in state aids, like in my view erroneously was done under the pressure of Germany and France some months ago, I had publicly recommended in an article to the Italian Prime Minister to use a veto in favor of Europe, not of Italy in that case. Then if we went down that road, which is a risk, we will undermine, among other things, the European competitiveness. And another example in the area of competitiveness and innovation, and this is something that the Institute for European Policy Making, which was mentioned, which has now been set up at Bocconi, is studying. Will the policy for innovation in Europe ever become as effective, as strong as the one pursued by DARPA in the US? Well, we might try to imitate that, but DARPA, as you will know, means Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And this is all done at the federal level in the US, and it begins always as being defense related. Can we in Europe, without having a federation at a developed stage and without having a defense policy of the EU at any stage, preliminary or advanced, can we? So let's try to look, yes, in this case, I say it's very important to make comparative economic analysis of the cases there and here, but let us not forget that probably the most important argument, reason for the relative low competitiveness of Europe is not an economic one, is an institutional one, and we would have to measure the cost of not having a political Europe. So big topics, probably going a bit beyond the origins of the more economic approach to competition policy. But thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Monti, for the really great talk that you have given, and we look forward to you contributing again to the policy initiatives you just spoke about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.